Good evening and welcome to Channel 1 News.
First up on tonight's program, a court case between the state of Maryland and the Second Bank of the United States is sweeping the headlines as it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court.
Here's footage from last night's trial.
Will the defendant please rise? How does the defendant please?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Now, I have a lot to say, so I decided to write it out. But I just want to first start out to say thank you, Your Honor. And now, when the state of Maryland's banks began to fail in the depression of the economy, they blamed their troubles on the Bank of the U.S. to compensate. They imposed a hefty tax on any banks not chartered within the state, which included one bank, the Second Bank of the U.S. This taxation is unconstitutional, out of line, and my client as a representative of this bank will not be paying a dime to the state.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. You may be seated. Mr. Luther. And representation of the prosecuting state of Maryland, you may now give your response.
Thank you, Your Honor. Though my opponent gives an interesting argument, he has, however, failed to recognize that because Maryland is a sovereign state, it has the authority to tax businesses within its border, and that because the Second Bank of the United States is considered one of such business, it has to pay the tax. Furthermore, because the federal government has the authority to regulate state banks, Maryland has the power to do the same to federal banks. And lastly, the prosecution argues that the Constitution does not give specific authority for the Congress to even establish the Bank of the United States in the first place.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
It's a common knowledge that any powers of the government are implied rather than specifically stated in the Constitution. The establishment of a national bank is a necessary and proper function of the Congress.
Your Honor, since our nation lacks an establishment of a single form of paper currency, local banks not only have the power to make loans, but to issue their own banknotes to serve as daily use currency instead of gold and silver coins. These banks have been forced to look to their state legislators to restrict the Bank of the United States operation.
It appears as though tensions were high during last night's trial. What do you think, Shanae?
Well, Tyrone, things seem to be getting out of hand, but this afternoon the court is reconvening to deliver the judge's verdict.
Our newscaster, John, is reporting live from the scene in Washington, D.C. Over to you, John. Thank you. I'm here today, sitting in the Supreme Court, waiting for Judge Marshall. It's been an unusual case, and we've seen here, and we're all anxiously awaiting for the verdict, what should be released momentarily.
Will the audience please rise for Judge Marshall? The audience might be seated now.
Thank you. The court has reached a unanimous opinion. First, the Constitution gives Congress the power to make all laws necessary and proper to carry out the specific powers conferred on Congress in Article 1, Section 8. Secondly, incorporating Alexander Hamilton's doctrine of broad construction of the Constitution, let the end be legitimate, let it be within the scope of the Constitution, and all means which are appropriate, which are not prohibited, are constitutional. Since the bank is a lawful instrument on specific federal authority, the court has ruled that the law creating the bank was constitutional. Furthermore, Article 4 of the Constitution says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, anything in the laws of any state to the country notwithstanding. And therefore, the power to tax involves the power to destroy, and the states have no power, by taxation otherwise, to retard, impede, or controls the laws of federal government, and thus the law imposing a tax on the Bank of the United States is unconstitutional, and we hereby void it.
It has been a crazy night here in the courthouse. I'm going to have to ask Shanae, please, to please tell us the significance of the verdict. Take it away, Shanae.
Thank you, Tyrone. So, first of all, I'd like to say that The significance of the court case definitely solidified the fact that the federal laws are supreme over state laws. And secondly, it has settled the long-running debate over the interpretation of our Constitution regarding the ability to create a national bank. And lastly, using the new loose interpretation, Judge Marshall ruled that even though no clause in the Constitution specifically mentions a national bank, the Constitution has given the federal government implied power to create one.
Amen, brother.